Number 8. Jake MERENDINO. Investigators and detectives were shocked after Jake MERENDINO's body was discovered in May of 2015. The man had been brutally murdered with over 20 stab wounds. His neck was also slashed so deep that he was almost decapitated. Jake was a well-known real estate investor in Texas and had amassed quite the fortune through his work. And not long before his death, he'd been visiting San Diego, California. It was here that he first met a male escort named David Meza, who he developed a romantic relationship with. Basically, Jake became the young man's sugar daddy by paying for luxury gifts and vacations. The wealthy 51-year-old pursued his feelings with David for about 2 years, and during that whole time, he was in the dark about his lover's life. You see, the escort was actually dating a woman named Taylor Langston. They were high school sweethearts that eventually got engaged. Before Jake's murder, Taylor even became pregnant. But she had no idea that her fiancé was involved with Jake, or that he worked as a porn star and escort on the side. She only knew that David worked for him, but just thought he was the man's bookkeeper. In 2015, Jake and David went on a trip together to Jake's recently purchased condo in Mexico. It was there that the victim said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with his lover. He allegedly even wrote down a quick will that would transfer all of his assets to David if he died, as a testament to his love. But little did he know, his death was right around the corner. On the night of May 1st, David left Jake in a hotel room at Rosarito Beach and went back home to San Diego. A few hours later, Jake told workers at the hotel that he had gone to help one of his friends who somehow got stranded. And unfortunately, this was the last time anyone ever saw the victim alive. Coincidentally, the very next day, David and his fiancée came back to the hotel, saying that they needed to grab a few things out of the room. They took some expensive items, like a $15,000 watch, multiple Apple devices, and a laptop. And to justify his actions of taking the stuff, David showed the makeshift will Jake had written out on a notepad. This, however, raised suspicions and prompted the hotel to call law enforcement. When police officers arrived, they immediately started to question David and Taylor. By this point, Jake's body had been found inside his Range Rover. David, the primary suspect, initially said that he hadn't seen the victim at all the night he was killed. But not long into the interrogation, he changed his story, claiming that he did actually meet Jake near the crime scene, but he had nothing to do with the murder. Luckily, police weren't buying it, so they officially charged the escort with the crime. The court and jury found David guilty of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. His fiancée Taylor was also given a shorter stint behind bars for lying to authorities to protect David. We can only imagine the terror and betrayal Jake must have felt as the man he loved turned against him. After 2 years in a relationship, he likely believed that David was the person he would spend eternity with. Instead, he was the last person Jake ever saw, as he was horrifically murdered. Number 7. SHEILA LABARRE. In the small town of Epping, New Hampshire, there was a woman who wanted to make a name for herself, SHEILA LABARRE. She was absolutely beautiful, and many people said she was a spunky girl. Some even described her as a firecracker, since her birthday was coincidentally on the 4th of July. SHEILA wasn't content with the small-town life though, and she wanted more for herself. So she set her sights on Dr. Wilfred LABARRE, one of the richest men in the town. The doctor made a living as a chiropractor and was respected within the close-knit community. He also happened to own a massive 115-acre farm where he raised horses in his free time. From an outsider's perspective, the man had it all, everything except someone to share it with. And that's when SHEILA decided to make herself known. The woman quickly seduced Wilfred, who was 34 years older than her. She doted on him, offering an abundance of affection and physical intimacy, and Wilfred fell right into her trap. Before long, the couple moved in together at the horse farm. They hadn't even gotten married yet, but SHEILA had started telling everyone in Epping to refer to her only as Mrs. LABARRE. While they weren't married through traditional avenues, since they had been living together and were in a relationship, through the common laws of marriage, they were wed. So when Wilfred died from a sudden heart attack one day, SHEILA got all of his money, property and assets. It did not take SHEILA long to look for new romantic partners. One of them was Kenneth County, a man who was half her age at the time they met. This seemed like a common theme in the women's relationships. When things between them started to get more serious, SHEILA slowly and meticulously started to isolate Kenneth from his loved ones. But the man was very close to his mother, so when she had not heard from her son in multiple weeks, she decided to go to the police and report him as missing. Officers found him at SHEILA's property and could do nothing since the man wanted to stay there. Legally, he was an adult, but he had development issues that made him act mentally like a 12-year-old child. When his parents ran into him one day at a grocery store, they noticed that he had multiple bruises over his body. His skin also looked pale, and he was using a motorized cart to get around. They were very worried about their son and asked if he was all right, but Kenneth would not say anything to them. And on that same day, detectives report that SHEILA bought a few large gas containers from the store. A few days after the encounter, SHEILA called Detective Sean Gallagher, one of the cops who allegedly looked into Kenneth's alleged disappearance. Gallagher said that SHEILA claimed her lover was a pedophile and was going to leave her. She also said that she could prove it. Within the phone call, the detective says he heard her talking to someone else behind the scenes, asking why they were throwing up and passing out. He was disturbed by the call, so Gallagher did some more digging into the case. He and a few other officers visited the LABARRE property early in the evening one day. Upon their arrival, they noticed a large burn pile smoking, so they went to take a look. According to Gallagher, he saw what looked like a human bone in the ashes. The others believed there was flesh smoking as well. This made them approach the farmhouse carefully, and as they were about to bust in through the front door, SHEILA called out to them from the driveway. She then calmly let them into the home, which by the way was absolutely filthy, and after a short conversation, she told them to get off her property. To the detectives, it was obvious that she was trying to hide something. Thankfully, overnight the cops were able to get a search warrant, and when they went back the next day, they immediately noticed that SHEILA was sifting through the ashes of the burn pile from the night before. She was covered in soot and was acting strangely. While there, the officers found a few small pieces of bone, and before long, the entire property was labeled a crime scene. A thorough search revealed blood in multiple rooms of the farmhouse, and strangely enough, wild rabbits running loose inside. They even searched the septic tank and found the birth certificate of a man named Michael Deloge. Apparently, Michael was a homeless man with no family ties who had come to work for SHEILA at the farm. Eventually, they started having an intimate relationship. Some of the man's DNA was recovered at the crime scene, leading police to believe he was dead, since no one had seen him in weeks. DNA samples taken from the burned pile were linked to Kenneth as well, meaning SHEILA was suspected of killing at least 2 people. In 2008, a court found SHEILA LABARRE guilty of 2 murders, but some believe she may have killed more. The bodies of her confirmed victims were never fully recovered, since she used multiple methods of disposal. During the trial, her defense team tried to plead insanity, but court psychologists determined that SHEILA was sane. As a result, she was handed 2 life sentences, which she's currently serving. We doubt that a life behind bars is anything close to the picturesque vision SHEILA imagined she would live in when she first met Dr. Wilfred LABARRE. But who knows, perhaps her former lover's heart attack wasn't as sudden as some might think. Number 6. Ralph Reynolds Jr. In 2004, 67-year-old Ralph Reynolds Jr., a millionaire heir from Oregon, met 44-year-old Rachel Lee. At first, he thought that he and the woman were good friends, but little did he know, Rachel was trying to take everything from Ralph. When she realized her friend was set to inherit $15 million from the Reynolds tree farm, Rachel hatched an elaborate scheme and even got her daughter, 17-year-old Portia Lee, and her boyfriend, Blanche Lee, involved. To scam Ralph, Rachel made Portia take on an entirely new identity as Mary Marks, a British woman with a fake wig and even worse accent. She then wholeheartedly convinced the heir that he and Mary had a son together and that he needed to help support the mother of his child. but in reality, the kid was actually Rachel's grandson. You may be wondering how Ralph was so easily convinced. Well, for a rich man, he was incredibly lonely. He also believed in the paranormal, which is why his meeting with Rachel, a psychic, meant so much to him. He told her almost everything about his life, trusting her with his most intimate secrets. Eventually, their bond had grown so much that Ralph purchased a luxury home for Rachel and even hired her as a caretaker for his elderly father. Through this role, the woman slowly started to take over the Rains family assets and began siphoning money out of their accounts for her own selfish needs. Then a few years later, in 2007, Rachel had Portia pretend to be Mary Marks and sent her to meet Ralph at the Portland International Airport. When the two had their chance encounter, Portia convinced Ralph that she was also a psychic and gave him a surprising reading based on information her mother had told her. Before long, Mary also started working for the Rainers family, and Ralph had no idea he was being played. In 2008, the woman moved forward with their plan. Mary told the kind older man that she was going to be deported, and in order to stay in the country, she convinced Ralph to help her get a green card by marrying her. Somehow, she also managed to get him to agree to fathering a child. Thankfully, their relationship was deep but platonic, so Ralph thought they had conceived through artificial insemination. While all of this was happening, Portia was actually pregnant, making the lie even more convincing. Throughout the next few years, Portia or Mary lived a fulfilling life with Ralph and Giorgio, their supposed child. Portia kept up the facade by living in California, not with Ralph. The entire time, Rachel and her daughter were draining millions of dollars from the wealthy family. But luckily, they were finally found out in 2014 when police officers got suspicious after noticing luxury vehicles parked outside a rundown shop owned by Rachel. Inside the psychic shop, investigators found multiple expensive items that were bought through Ralph's money. When the Lees were arrested, Portia was discovered with $36,000 worth of cash stuffed inside her pants. They were accused of fraud, money laundering, and more. In the end, Rachel was imprisoned for 8 years. Portia received 33 months behind bars, and Rachel's boyfriend Blanchet got 2 years for helping with the scheme. And sadly, after being tricked for over 7 years, thinking he had a son, a wife, and close friends, Ralph Rainers Jr. was left with a measly $200,000 compared to his original multi-million-dollar fortune. Number 5. Barry Pring. A British millionaire named Barry Pring died in an alleged hit-and-run accident back in 2008. The 47-year-old lost his life in Ukraine, where he was visiting his recently wed wife, Gianna Zuzina. The couple had only been married for a year before the incident. Immediately after news of Barry's passing started circulating through, people began to suspect that Gianna had a hand in her husband's death. Apparently, the man's body was sent back to his home country, England, with multiple organs like his liver and kidneys not included. Barry's body had also been prematurely embalmed, meaning investigators in the UK could not run any meaningful blood tests to look further into the man's strange death. According to some witnesses who interacted with Barry the night he was killed, he had been complaining of a burning sensation. This led many, like the victim's brother Sean, to suspect foul play in the form of a possible poisoning. Sean believes that Gianna and whoever worked with her removed the crucial organs so no drug screenings could be done. If this were the case, it would mean that law enforcement agents in Ukraine would have to have been involved in the elaborate scheme to help remove the body parts. Sean's suspicions of Gianna were heightened when she allegedly asked him if authorities would conduct another autopsy once Barry was returned to Britain. According to him, she seemed worried about the possibility, so much so that the Pring family decided to hire a private investigator to look into the case further. This new inquest revealed that Gianna had a potential romantic relationship with a policeman overseeing the murder case in Ukraine. It's also believed that a corrupt cop helped dump the vehicle that hit Barry into a lake and destroyed it. Some say that the identification plates from the same car were also purposefully removed before the hit and run. And to add even more fuel to the flame, one of Gianna's close friends named Tetiana Parakleta has gone on record saying that Gianna didn't love her husband and that she only married the man for his money. She and Barry met online and got hitched quickly, and before the marriage, Gianna made a living as a stripper, even though she was never found guilty of murder. Many people involved with the case still believe Gianna was responsible for Barry's death. She didn't seem too upset by his passing either. In fact, she's now living out a luxurious life in Spain with another rich British man named Ivan Lister. Maybe one day the truth of Barry Pring's suspicious death will be revealed, but for now, the case has been closed. Do you think Gianna Zuzina killed her husband? Let us know in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and join the Bad Badger fam. Number 4. RUKHSANA BIBI. 38-year-old RUKHSANA BIBI received a life sentence in July 2017 after having her husband, 65-year-old Mohammed Yusuf, murdered. The woman worked together with her secret boyfriend, Mohammed Arif, to carry out her twisted plot. While peacefully sleeping in his bed in the English town of Accrington, Yusuf was assaulted. The attackers used a hammer and hit the victim in the back of the head. The suspects also fatally slashed Yusuf's throat that night, and it was later discovered that Bibi and Arif worked together in the brutal slaying. During early investigations, police realized that Bibi had been having an affair. The illicit relationship actually started before she and Yusuf were even married and had continued after the union. The strange thing is, Arif was actually the one who first suggested that Bibi and Yusuf should get hitched. It's likely that this was part of the long-running plot to steal the victim's wealth, which included a post office he owned back in Pakistan. He also had a £500,000 life insurance policy that was coincidentally taken out the month of his death. Evidence of forged signatures in Yusuf's name were located in Bibi's home, suggesting that she had tried to copy it in order to transfer her husband's money into her name. A day after the murder, officers found £22,000 British pounds in Arif's possession. This was a strange amount, considering how closely it matched the £24,000 that Yusuf had in savings. It didn't take long for police to connect the dots and arrest Bibi and Arif, and now both suspects are spending the remainder of their lives behind bars. Number 3. SAKI SUDO. In 2018, a wealthy Japanese real estate investor named Kosuke Nozake decided to marry a beautiful young adult film actress named SAKI SUDO. At the time of their wedding, Kosuke was 77 years old and his new wife was only 22. Many people who knew the man warned him that SAKI was most likely just after his money, but still, Kosuke went through with the marriage. During his life, the man had earned quite the reputation of being a ladies' man. He frequently described himself as a Don Juan-type character who enjoyed seducing women. Kosuke even wrote a short memoir of his playboy life that sold thousands of copies, and he even spoke about his marriage and eventful sex life in a book published shortly before his death. Unfortunately, 3 months after marrying Saki, Kosuke was killed through poisoning. An autopsy revealed that high levels of narcotics were discovered in his system at the time of his death. Immediately after his passing, Saki took over her deceased husband's company and quickly made plans to leave the country. She was later arrested and charged with murder after internet searches for drugs and poisoning were seen in her history. Claims that Kosuke was pondering divorce before his mysterious death also raised suspicions that Saki was responsible for the murder. But this case is still ongoing, so we'll have to wait and see if Saki was truly a killer gold digger or not. Number 2. MARC SHEILA. We've discussed a lot of women today who went after their partners for their money, but men are just as capable of being gold diggers. In 2019, a German bouncer was accused of killing his girlfriend to take her money. 32-year-old MARC SHEILA was visiting a hotel in Switzerland with Anna Reid, his 22-year-old wealthy British girlfriend, when the trip took a turn for the worse. Anna's body was discovered in the couple's bathroom, and investigators determined that she'd been strangled. There were also other bruises and small injuries on the victim as well. According to MARC, the death was a complete accident. The two were supposedly playing an intimate game that involved putting a towel around Anna's neck as they kissed. Mark says that his girlfriend kept asking him to pull harder, so he only followed her orders. Obviously, this story sounded pretty fishy to detectives. And that's when they looked into Mark's history and discovered that he was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Anna was the heir to an immense horse racing fortune and had the means to fix all of her lover's monetary problems. Police also heard from other hotel guests who were staying the night of the murder that a loud argument was heard from the couple's room. People say that they heard crying and a woman's voice say, "You are killing me." After Anna's death, her boyfriend was sentenced to 18 years in prison for the murder. This ruling was made in 2021, and Mark has since appealed the decision, adamantly standing firm on his claims of innocence. Number 1. BIBHU PRAKASH SWAIN. By pretending to be a rich doctor, a 66-year-old Indian man managed to trick over 27 different women into marrying him, only to run away with their money instead. BIBHU PRAKASH SWAIN has been dubbed the mastermind behind one of the biggest marriage scams in his country's history. Many of the women BIBHU targeted were respected professionals in their fields. His victims included a police officer, a doctor, multiple teachers, and even 2 women who worked for the Supreme Court. The man's ability to pull so many girls surprised many, since he himself isn't exactly a prince. BIBHU is only 5'2", and many would describe him as not being in the best shape. So, in order to pull off his scam, he used fake ID cards and certificates to make women believe he was rich. BIBHU used over 128 different credit cards and even defrauded 13 separate banks. Police officers in India finally arrested him after digging through a long trail of evidence that he had left behind. Do you know any gold diggers in real life, or would you ever be one? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger.